Good afternoon. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk, which is a production of Muslim Network TV and Sound Vision Corporation. Today, we're going to do both public policy and foreign policy as we begin to see what our candidates have had to say about each. So much on the table. I hope that we can get to all of it. Last night, we tried to talk a little bit about the violence, but what is driving the violence is the growing divide in our community. So I think that it is important for us to see what these candidates have said. And many of you out there, like me, peeked at each convention, kind of heard the same things in some instances, new things in other instances, as candidates had people pitch for them their platform and then pitch them for themselves. This afternoon, I have our political correspondent, and I'm naming him that, Scott Hibbard, who, as you know, is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science, and he's also the chair of political science at DePaul University. I'm not going to go through his whole resume again, but I will say that he has a forthcoming book. And I'm trying to remember, he's going to kill me for this, the name of it. And I don't see it in my bio. What's the name of your forthcoming book?
Wait till it comes out. But I'm working on American foreign policy and political Islam.
There you go. I also have with me Professor Khalil Murrar, who used to teach at DePaul University and is now at Governor State. He, too, is a political science person, and his most recent book is Middle East Conflicts, The Basics. Oh, I got to read that. And he has done Uphill on the Hill, Ethnic Lobbying After the Arab Winter, which is very, very interesting. Both of them are more than qualified than I to speak on public and foreign policy. I mean, I listened to those conventions, and I won't say I was uninterested. I didn't know what to single out because the DNC convention, I was very, very happy that somebody gave Biden whatever it was they gave him that kept him on script. I enjoyed, as usual, hearing Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Some of the people I kind of shied away from because in this kind of convention, you really want to know what is the script you have. So let's start with the Democratic convention. Either of you.
All right, I'll dive in. So I think first things first, keep in mind, like, what are conventions about? I mean, there's a in a typical setting, they're there to kind of broker the the different factions of the political parties and bring them together and select a candidate, what have you. Now, this one was very different, as you qualify this. And but the other part of the convention is really to kind of reintroduce candidates to the larger American audience, larger American public.
Okay.
So during the primary process, the people that are really engaged are the party faithful. When you get to the national convention, it's kind of a reintroduction, if you will, to the broader electorate. And so you're trying to introduce the person. You're also trying to draw distinctions between your party and the other party, and ostensibly you're meant to give a positive message and a positive spin on those differences. So if there's a script behind the Democratic National Convention, it's Joe, you trust Joe. He's he's part of the Barack Obama team or part of the Obama administration, and you can trust the well running of the country in these hands. And to that end, there was a really as kind of a positive vision, a positive message.
Yeah.
And there were criticisms, definitely, and Michelle Obama's takedown of the president was pretty intense, but nonetheless, there was there's this overarching message of hope. And this is kind of the big difference between the Trump or the Republican National Convention, which really harped on fear. The Democratic Convention was really talking about hope.
Khalil, your take.
Since Professor Hibbard took the Democratic Convention, I'll take the Republican Convention. It was truly a Trump family affair. And by that, I mean, there was a lot of people from the Trump family that were basically saying, my dad's a good guy, vote for him. But, interestingly enough, just as the DNC was about hope, I would say one word that would sum up the Republican National Convention was fear. And that's a tactic that, marketers appeal to. And you don't have to be Don Draper on Mad Men to know how to appeal to that. And to not just appeal to fear, but to ultimately capitalize on it politically. I think that this is this administration in a nutshell. And conservatives that are well-meaning have refused to give their support to this president because of that.
Yeah. And if I
Let's go back just 1 second. I've done this to Scott quite a few times. Just so the Democratic Party seems to be made up of multiple parties. They're not on the same page about much except get rid of Trump, but you have to have more than that to get people to vote for you. So if you had to say, what were the top 5 points in the Democratic Convention, what would you say?
Now, who are you going to that question? Is that to Khalil or to me?
Either one of you.
Go Khalil.
I'll go through 1 through 3, and then you'll take the last 2, Scott.
Yeah.
So I would say the 5 points of the Democratic National Convention. I would agree with Scott that hope was the sort of thing that was the glue that sort of kept those points together. But just as importantly, if I could break it up into like these 5 sections, I would say the first one is a rejection of Trump. So just remember that R for rejection of Trump. The second one is to reject the status quo. The third is to reject what this country has become, not just the status quo that this country finds itself in. The fourth is, and you could see what I'm getting at here: reject, 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 reject. If I could sum it up in 5 points, it's rejecting the current situation, rejecting this presidency. And it's very uncomfortable if you're a Democrat right now, but effectively the election will be on Trump's success or lack thereof. It will be a referendum on Donald Trump. Mark my words, for November 3rd, because the Democrats.
Whoops.
Yeah. Let me pick up from there because I think Khalil is right on track. You could look at, on the one hand, there's definitely a rejection of the status quo, but there's also, there was actually a positive message of inclusion, positive message of kind of a return to normality. There's kind of a positive message of healing and moving forward. And to that end, I think the DNC was, or the Democratic National Convention was incredibly well scripted. It was kind of amazing. I mean, it was a very professionally done, series of vignettes and speeches, and again, there was this positive message of that America is better than the rampant lawlessness that that we've seen within the current administration. That and again, we get back to this notion of there is a there's a better path, one defined by civil discourse and by engaging all elements of society and bridging those divides. And it was really telling that there were a number of Republicans who spoke at the convention.
What do you think that media, the role that media played? This was a virtual meeting.
Yeah,
there was nobody in the audience.
Yeah.
What role do you think that played?
So, well, I think it played well because in some respects, if you look at the conventions over the last 20 years, they really have evolved into media spectacles, and there's much about the selection of a candidate as they are about rolling out a new product, if you will.
Yeah.
transitioning from the primary process to the general election process.
Yeah.
And so, in some respects, this is just the logical conclusion of where we are as a media society, in this hyper mediated environment. What's interesting that Khalil didn't really hit on this, but the other aspect of this I think is really important is if you look at the Democratic message, it's trying to be inclusive. And to that end, to get back to your earlier point, the Democrats are a very diverse, collection of people and factions and groups.
Yeah.
And so the message is consciously trying to be inclusive of all those diverse voices and to find some kind of common ground. And it becomes strange to have centrist Republicans abandoning the Republican Party and moving to the Democratic Party and speaking in the Democratic Convention. But this is crucial, and this is crucial if you're actually going to win an election. The real failing, I would argue, of the RNC, or the Republican National Convention, is it was really only speaking to the base. There was really no effort to try to draw in other voters or try to expand, the electorate that might be supporting, Donald Trump. Rather, it was basically playing to the Fox News crowd. And a lot of the messaging that came out struck many people, including family members of mine who I watched the RNC the convention with, as just odd, because like, where are they coming? Where is this coming from? But if you're a Fox News watcher, you are more attuned to the conspiracy theories that are rolled out by different Republican candidates and whatnot.
So, oh goodness, where is that coming from? And the RNC, Trump's RNC, I guess you call it an acceptance of the nomination. I'm not too sure because he spoke every night, so I don't know which one was which. I just got a little overwhelmed, so we say. He talked about rebuilding the economy, which is the first notice that I had that he was acknowledging that the economy was damaged. He also talked about the defending the country against enemies, and I was trying to figure out who are those enemies.
They're essentially, that's a great question, Aminah. And there's the enemies that Trump likes to portray are no longer these sort of like Muslim others, these phantom ISIS types. The enemy is really within, and I think it's not really a dog whistle when you look at the tweets. It is dog whistling when he says just enemies. The enemies are basically, quote unquote, the radical left, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, etc. Those are the enemies. They're internal this time.
Yeah. Oh. And if I could add to that, one of the interesting things, if you listen to his speech, or there was a speech by Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, which basically conflates all of that. So it's not just Black Lives Matters, it's not just Antifa, but it's Joe Biden and the socialists in the Democratic Party who are going to drag us far to the left. And part of the narrative is to kind of paint these centrist Democrats as far left Democrats, and to kind of paint everybody with the same brush, and to basically make an argument that if you vote for Joe Biden, you're basically voting for anarchy in the streets, which is not at all the case. But that's part of the narrative that the Trump administration was rolling out. And again, I think it resonated with the base, but it fell flat within that centrist middle ground that doesn't watch Fox News on a regular basis.
Okay, we've got to take a break right now, but I want you to think more about the enemies, and it looks like it's anarchy in the streets to me now anyway. So I don't know how you're going to prevent what's already there. But when we come back in a moment.
I think you're muted.
She is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. And now it's
Before I go to my original question, it seems like we're on a very slippery slope to one of those archies, you know, oligarchy, submarchy, or the other archy.
Autocracy.
And there you go. And in the end, all of us wind up living under a tyrant with no right. I mean, Trump is now trying, and in his speech, with his declaration of enemies within, trying to suppress the right to protest, which is still, I mean, until he does something with it, a First Amendment right. But he doesn't, because he doesn't know them, seem to have any regard for rights, and he keeps stepping out of the bounds, I know. And I, like many in our listening audience, am confused.
Well, if I can just respond to that very quickly. The Trump narrative and Donald Trump as a candidate thrives on that kind of chaos. And it's not surprising that, you know, when he goes to Kenosha or he sends troops to Portland, it's not there to settle things down, it's there to whip things up. Because in some respects, whipping things up and creating more contention in the streets and more violence in the streets plays in his narrative that, you know, that a Biden administration will be too weak to deal with the problems facing America. Only a strong man can resolve the issues. And this gets to your point of the, you know, the oligarchs or the authoritarian ruler. This is part of that paradigm. You know, stoking.
So we're on our way.
What's that?
We're on our way.
Well,
we're on our way.
Yeah, and you know, his efforts to make things worse plays to his base and plays to his strengths, and will help him in the general election. Again, this is where, you know, the Bidens come in, the Obamas come in, and say, you know, there is a different way. We can work together to solve the issues in American society. And, you know, you really do have this choice, if you will, between a hopeful future or a fearful future. Well,
Khalil, let me ask you, since I know both of you write on the Middle East, but let me start with you. Saudi in our comments says justify law and order campaign. Now, when you create the enemies, and the ones that he has created are socialists, communists, and black and brown and white people who don't like the injustices that are going on. So what do? You lock them all up? Or you do interfering with the elections, is injecting people with poisons? I mean, give me a global scope I can grab onto.
I mean, that's a very scary question that you're asking, and a very good one at the same time. Do you lock them all up? No, but you do lock them all up for the next 4 years of Trump being president, for 8 instead of just 4. You lock them all up by dashing their hopes for an end to police brutality. You lock them all up by literally, in many cases of our black and brown brothers and sisters, by incarcerating them, literally. You lock them all up by disenfranchising them. You know, voter suppression is nothing new in the national history in the United States. And as Barack Obama himself pointed out, voter suppression is around right now, at this very moment in 2020 America. And we're not just talking about the mail system. You lock them up by basically making it seem as if to agree with Scott, and I hate to agree with Scott on this one, but that the only candidate that is worthy of the choosing of the American people, the only choice that we have, is Donald Trump, because of the chaos that his campaign has thrived on, the chaos that his presidency has engendered. And, you know, here's what really scares me. It's not so much that Donald Trump now is talking about law and order. It's that we in the United States of America are in a situation where the chaos that he's talking about being this existential threat to this country is actually coming to pass, thanks to Donald Trump.
Well, when I looked at the protest in Portland and I looked at Kenosha, I was drawn back to the Arab Spring. I saw Egypt all over again and some other countries with young people trying to exercise some rights, protesting bad government, bad policing. And then I saw the same thing happen to them. Tear gas, rubber bullets, real bullets, and then just lock them all up.
Well, I mean, the one kind of positive note I would say is, again, the scale is different. I mean, in the Arab uprisings, I mean, you had huge sections of the population turning out in protests against the regime, and that's a whole separate set of issues. But I would argue that if you look across American society today, the protests tend to be very localized. Many of the, there are ways to deal with many of the issues in a constructive way. Unfortunately, we need really systemic change, and you're not going to find that with the current administration. And I'm not sure that Joe Biden is going to solve all these problems in the next 2 years if he gets elected. Far from it. But the thing is, the question is, which direction are you going? Are you going on a question of reform? Or are you going with a question of maintaining the status quo? And if there was one big theme that came out of both the conventions, one was there's a need for change, and we've got a vision for change, and the other one is there's no problem with the way things are. We need to maintain the status quo. And so this really is, in some respects, as Khalil said earlier, this campaign or this election is a referendum on the Trump presidency. But what it really is are we going to move backwards or are we going to move forwards? And the last comment I'll make on all of this is I really hope that all those people that are in the streets and that have been protesting actually turn out to vote, because it's always been a challenge that people are, particularly for the younger generations, it's not that hard to get them into the streets for a protest, but it's actually really hard to get them to the ballot box to vote. And it's just one of the paradoxes of American society.
Let me come back to that. We have to take a break, but there are some other issues that have come up around both of these septuagenarians. It's incredible to me that in 2021 we're voting for people who are even older than me out there. And
the 37.
Exactly. And all of these issues. Let us take a break and we'll be back. Okay, can you help me understand? Now, I know we have now a loosely defined group of domestic enemies, but we also have some interesting things where Biden hasn't said anything, like on the Israeli treaty negotiation, whatever it is you want to call it, with the UAE. We have stuff going on in Syria. We have stuff going on in Iraq. We have continuing Russian interference, especially in the Black community. We talked about this yesterday, how all of us are getting all these calls, robocalls, with these voices telling us stuff. The Chinese, however, forgot to use the translator and take the Chinese off, so they got immediately deleted. But we have all of these things going on. In addition, The word is now that you can't vote for Biden because he's gonna die. Look at him, and then you're gonna have Kamala Harris as president. Don't smile at me. Talk to me.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think Trump's going to die anytime soon. He's actually in much better shape than Donald Trump. But getting back to your larger issue, one of the stories that didn't get much airplay this week was how the Homeland Security buried a memo that was supposed to go to Congress about Russian interference in the election, and they know that it's going on, and people are very it's happening. And a lot of it's done through social media. A lot of it's done through the kind of stuff that you're talking about in terms of robocalls. And the head of the Department of Homeland Security just announced to Congress that they're no longer going to be doing in-person briefings. Now, to me, what scares me about that is you now see some degree of complicity of the administration in allowing this stuff to happen as a way of shaping the trajectory of the election. And this kind of gets back to my earlier point that if you look at all the polling numbers, I mean, Biden is up by anywhere from like 5 to 10%, depending on states, over Trump. But basically, he's got a single-digit lead, pretty much right across the board. And if the election were held tomorrow and it was free and fair, Biden would win. So how do you, if you don't have a robust base that's going to, or you don't have the votes to get you elected, how do you win an election? Well, you suppress, the vote, as Khalil was saying. You try to, allow some kind of manipulation of, or some kind of intrusion by, outside powers. And then you just go for an electoral strategy, or a strategy that's going to get you electoral college. And if you don't like the outcome, you can test it in the courts. So I just see this all going very, very badly. I see this race turning very ugly very quickly. And,
it is.
And it already is. But I'm very concerned about how this is all going to unfold, in the last weeks of October and the first week of November.
Let me ask you to go back and explain why is stopping in-person briefings important. I didn't know anybody briefed anybody.
Well, the short answer is, there are obligations within the within the executive branch. I mean, there are legal obligations that the intelligence community has to keep Congress apprised of its activities, and this is part of the oversight function of Congress. This is part of just the constitutional obligations, but also
do it if it's
so there are statutory obligations for briefing or for keeping people informed. Now you can argue that, well, we'll do this through paper, we'll write reports and give it to you, and as opposed to meeting with you in person in a closed hearing. Now, the problem with the issue is if you're meeting with somebody in a closed hearing and they're talking about something, members of Congress can actually ask follow-up questions, or can ask probing questions in areas that the Department of Homeland Security might not want to address. So if you're just sending people a report, it may be very thin on certain areas, and it may focus on areas that you want to focus on, but you're not addressing, you're not getting to what the members of Congress actually want. And if you're in a in-person setting, the members of Congress will pry that information out of you.
So, Khalil, me and the rest of the world are totally confused by the fact that we have all these statutory regulations. We have all these laws. And the Republican Party just says, okay, you can have them and we'll do this over here. How does that happen?
It's a good way to put it, Aminah. And, to sort of follow up on Scott's comment, I think that it's a very sobering reality in 21st century America, 2020 America, that our institutions, our Constitution, and the oath that we take to those things, especially to the Constitution, are only as good as the leadership taking the oath. This is not something that is new in American politics. Presidents have suspended habeas corpus. They have sent troops over to other states to wage war. They have done all kinds of things. This is nothing new. What's really striking about this right now is that it's happening not just in the midst of a global pandemic, that it's happening as the stakes are much higher, especially given the challenges that we face from international actors, and not just Russia, right, but China especially.
Yeah. And if I could add something, going back to your original point, Aminah, even in the Republican National Convention, there were violations of law.
Tell me.
The use of government property to stage political events is a violation of the Hatch Act, which precludes people using their public office for political purposes. The fact that
somebody call him on it?
Yeah, well, so the many of these laws do not have. So it's basically up to the Department of Justice to enforce the law.
Oh God, I can't stand it.
And this is one of the problems. It's something like the Hatch Act. You know, if a member of Congress had done this, if Nancy Pelosi had done something like this, I could totally see the Republican Department of Justice going after her. But in this instance, it was the Republican National Committee that was violating the law. One other instance was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. When you're serving overseas, and he was actually in Jerusalem, right. And gave a speech from the from the rooftop of a home in Jerusalem, and there was all kinds of religious symbolism in that, which kind of caters to the evangelical Christian base within the Trump administration. But that violated any number of norms and actually the Hatch Act itself. He shouldn't, sitting secretaries of state do not do that. But in this instance, they did. And again, there's a this is part and parcel of the Trump administration's flagrant violation of norms and rules that historically bound American, or have helped American political system to operate, function in a cohesive manner. But the telling response by the chief of staff of the White House was, people outside the Beltway don't care, and they're relying upon that to get away with these kind of norm busting activities, which again, in the long run, they coarsen political attitudes and they undermine the integrity of the political system.
Well, I want you guys to think about, I think we are coming up on our last break, but I want you to think about, if you get to violate everything and you get away with it, what good is the Department of Justice, what is a fourth branch of government that I didn't know about? Or what good is Congress if it can't balance anything? And if you get away with them, does the following administration get away with them too? We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Okay, so you can answer those in any order that you choose, because I'm losing all faith in something called the three branches of government. Can nobody check anybody doing anything?
Well, very briefly, this is going to be one of the really interesting questions, if assuming Biden gets elected, is will many of the crimes that have been committed under the current administration, will they be prosecuted under a new Department of Justice? And
no.
And it remains to be seen. It will be interesting. In some respects, I would argue that if you want to preserve the integrity of this democracy, certain things have to be, yes, people have to be prosecuted for violations of law. Now, to what extent remains to be seen. The larger issue is how divisive will that be? I mean, this was one of the challenges with Barack Obama. I mean, love the man, loved what he did, but at the end of the day, no one went to prison for the financial collapse, right? No one went to prison for manipulating intelligence and lead up to the Iraq War. The concern at the time is like they're desperately trying to save the economy and exist in a very partisan environment, and there was no stomach for that fight.
Yeah, but if there's no stomach ever for writing things, Khalil, how do you ever get back to some notion of democracy, rule of law, and all of those wonderful things that we tout to the rest of the world?
I mean, that's a huge concern that I think that we're wise to tell your viewers about. And getting back to democracy, the ultimate way to do it is to get out and vote. It's really disturbing that if you support Joe Biden, that your candidate of choice is only 5 to 10 points ahead in states, some of which don't even matter. It's the battleground states that matter. And if you look at those, we're talking about a narrower margin now. So really, to get back to sort of a more optimistic and hopeful note, hopefully, right, it really is about the importance of the vote. You can have all the 3 branches of government in the world. You can have all the checks and balances in the world. You're absolutely right, Aminah. And to sort of, take on the points that Scott's making as well, the vote will be the way to get this presidency out of office so that there's even a hope of having trials, or even a hope of pardoning folks, or even a hope of coming back together as a country, divisive or not.
But we already know that it's not the popular vote that elects the president, which really ticked me off. It's something ephemeral called the Electoral College. And we already know that there have been people in the Electoral College, which was supposed to be elected by one party. I mean, each party gets to elect them, that some of them voted against what their states voted for to serve their own interests.
Faithful selectors. So, again, this kind of gets back to, I'm at the end of the day, I'm kind of an optimist. I'm definitely a Menshevik. I think that change can happen, even if it's like incremental, Menshevik as opposed to Bolshevik. And the thing is, if it's not enough just to, have a new president, you really need to, have a population that's engaged. You need a strong vote in both House and the Senate. And, my assumption is there is a reactionary or a major vote that's coming in November. And if it's large enough, it will, implement, significant change. And the other thing I would argue is that, the electorate is getting younger. You look at where the mass of the people are, but the young people tend not to vote. If they turn out in a significant way, they can really shape, not just this, the outcome of this election, but it can really shape the trajectory for the next, 10, 20 years.
But it's another but in there. I'm trying to get to be optimistic. You have a whole NBA. 70% of them are not registered to vote. We have all of these young people, even some of those who were in the street, who are not registered to vote. You're telling me you're moving my darn mailbox. Now I gotta go hunt down the ballot, the special box for the ballot. In a pandemic, which is still there, with protests that are still there, with looming food shortages and the ending of housing moratoriums, why do I need to, how can I, in all my anxiety, focus on any of this?
I don't know if I got an answer for that one.
But that's, what comes back is neither one of them. I mean, Trump talked about rebuilding the economy. I don't know what that means. I started watching, what is that, that Bloomberg page that has all the numbers for
See,
stuff I don't know about and don't own. And I'm looking, they're doing fine. The economy sucks. So how can you have the stock market doing fine with high unemployment and what do we call it, under unemployment? Because now employers can hire people back and give them no benefits and cut the wages so that they can have jobs. The food pantries are drying up. I mean, it's too much.
Yeah. So part of your answer to your question is this also, I think, is a reflection of where this administration is, and particularly the Republican-controlled Senate, that they've had no problems, coming up with money for business. They've had no problems, coming up with some unemployment insurance for a certain period of time, which has now ended. But more to the point, the Federal Reserve has been flooding the capital markets with trillions of dollars of money, buying up corporate debt. And that's why the stock market is just through the roof. I mean, it's just shocking. You've got depression era level unemployment, and yet you've got foreclosures left, right, and center. But yeah, you've got the stock markets through the roof. And this is again, this is a byproduct of decisions made in the upper echelons of government. Now, I would argue that the Republicans have just blown it by not cutting a deal with the Democrats and passing a last round of stimulus, because what's going to happen in the next, it's already happening right now, yeah. But people are, more unemployment is going to tick up. Going to be more foreclosures. The economic situation is just going to be increasingly dire between now and November, and I think that's really going to hurt the Republicans in the lead up to the election.
Let me ask, because both of you teach political science, I have been I read too. Clinton opened the door to demolishing a wall between mortgages and something.
So it's between investment banking and private or investment banking and normal banking.
Yeah.
Okay. So now are we, in addition to everything else, headed toward another huge recession like Australia, where there's some things you can't hide? And public policy, maybe it's keeping up and I haven't read enough, but people in losing their homes, because only 50% of the people have these federally backed mortgages, and that means only 50% of the landlords have federally backed mortgages. And we're going to have people in the street, and it's going to be in the days before the election, the person said, I'm going to get you back in your house. But the CDC has canceled, extended the moratorium on mortgages. How can the Center for Disease Control now step in to expand something about mortgages? Aren't they in two different places? I am really getting confused about this government, guys.
Khalil, you want to go for that?
I mean, there's a lot to be confused about, Aminah, and if academics, if intellectuals like us are confused, imagine what this is doing to the person that's out literally right now in the streets, that have lost their home, or right. that basically had somebody that got killed, or worse, that their whole family got wiped out by COVID or something like that. Right. Those are the people that need the most amount of help. And I think that what you're saying is fundamentally true. And that is that if they need the most amount of help, they have the most amount at stake, they're going to be the least likely to vote. Never mind the confusion about the government that you and I and academics worldwide, the United States has become the laughingstock of the world. And the question then becomes, what do we do to fix that? I think there is hope, and the hope is in the political process. And even though the political process is bad, it could never be as bad as maybe 1860 when folks were enslaved, when 600,000 Americans died fighting one another, when the country was in crisis, divided between a North and a South. Now, listen, those things are very prophetic, not because they happened in the past and they have something to tell us about the present. They're prophetic because if we get to that point where we're that divided, it will be a civil war. And in many ways, it is a civil war right now that we're waging.
It is.
Yeah, but,
Wow.
but it's a different kind of civil war. I would argue it's
Thank you.
like a battle of ideas. And this is why I think the political process is so important, because it provides a forum for the debate of those ideas. And if you look at the Trump, going back to the RNC convention, the Republican National Convention, it really was not about ideas. I mean, there really was, they didn't have a platform. It was really kind of striking. It really became a cult of personality. And go back to Khalil's earlier comment, it was a family affair. And so you really do have these, whereas the Democratic National Convention had had a very robust platform. One may not agree with everything in it, but at least it's there was something there, and there was a set of ideas and values that were embodied in it. So again, going back to this idea that elections really are moments of choice, and this this is a moment of either you vote for you vote your fears or you vote your hopes, and I think that people kind of, at least a good chunk of mid-America, has seen through the Trump phenomenon, and they will be there will be voting. There will be a surge of Democratic voters in the fall. Whether or not it's going to be enough to end this administration is another matter, but we'll find out.
Elections are the ultimate check.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that it sounds like some of you need to be in your classrooms, kind of dispelling some of these notions and clearing up who's who and what's what, so that maybe we have to TikTok him again, huh? Or do one of those things, to get the attention of the young people so that they hurry up and register, but then they're clear on what's at stake. Because I know all these other things that I brought up, the housing, the food, the health care, all of those are at stake. But we have to add one more thing. And that's important. So let me give both of you the last word for our audience.
Khalil, you want to go?
Yeah, there's hope. There's hope. And it's not just that the elections are the ultimate check. It's that, love him or hate him, Donald Trump has created a situation. We used to say when Barack Obama ran, he brought out the young people. He brought out people that would have never come out to vote. Donald Trump brought those people out twice-fold, not because they want to vote for the right person, but because they want to vote against the wrong one. That's my last word.
Can I have a last word to your last word? Do you know, when you look at the stats, Barack Obama did not overwhelmingly win the white American vote, okay? But he brought out large numbers of others to vote for him. So that's an imperative. But the other imperative that we didn't get a chance to talk about was the Senate. Scott?
Yeah. So my last word is, elections really are about the battle of ideas. My real concern is the amount of disinformation that's coming into the process, which is muddying the waters. And and if you think about the way propaganda works, it's not really meant to prove that one thing is true as opposed to another. It's just meant to kind of cloud anyone's understanding about what's really out there and what's really true, and why one person is better than the other. And it's just that creating that seed of doubt, which is going to tamp down voter turnout. And this is what the Russians are doing in social media. This is what much of the right wing is doing. And so my real concern is just a free and fair election. That's that there will be disinformation, there will be meddling, but if that can be minimized, I will be grateful.
Right. Well, gentlemen, the hopeful pair, which is great. I think I'm gonna have to ask both of you to come back as we get closer to the election, because inevitably all of this craziness is going to ramp up. So keep your eyes open and your ears peeled, so we can at least have one venue where we're informing and we can get around. I mean, the news is driving me crazy. I mean, no matter which channel you turn to, they're all saying the same thing. I'm saying, did you all get the same script this morning? Or people are scared as to what they can say, as if we're already in that dictatorship. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen for Critical Talk. I've had the honor of having Professors Scott Hibbard and Khalil Murrar with me this afternoon. They will be back and we'll find out what they're teaching in their classes in this moment of breaking point. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. McLeod.